And so, welcome you all. We're going to present the book by Dr. Richard Schwartz, Therapy and Internal Family Systems. This is the second edition. This is the second edition in English, actually, but it is actually the first edition in Spanish. And we have here with us Dr. Schwartz, and this is a pleasure. And he is a doctor and in IFS. He's the author of the model. He is assistant professor of the psychiatrist department of the Harvard Medical School. He has been disseminating the IFS therapy throughout the world. He is also the founder of the Center for Self-Leadership at Oak Park, and he coordinates trainings in IFS in the States and everywhere in the world. He's been invited as a speaker for many conferences. He's got so many publishings, and his website is ifs-institute.com. And the mission of the IFS Institute is to bring more leadership of the self to the world. So this book has been created with Marta. She's not here with us at the moment, but she's a PhD and assistant professor at part-time in the School of Medicine of Harvard, and she's also consultant in the Cambridge Health Alliance. The book in Spain, this is the first edition, as we were saying. It is the second edition, however, in English. The original book was published 25 years ago at the Guilford Publishers, and we're so happy here because the second edition is bringing us 60% new content and updated content, because in all these years, almost, 30, 40 years of IFS, there's so many collaborators have been contributing to provide content, and this is like a treasure for us. It's a complete guide, a really complete guide for all of us, and it also shows much more about the self and about your own process and how you got to the IFS. But of course, to talk about the book, I will give you the floor, Dr. Schwartz.
Okay, thank you, Marta and Enrique. I'm so grateful to you guys for translating. I really trust that you'll do it justice, because I know Enrique anyway. I'm just meeting you, but I really trust him. So very exciting for me to have you do this, and to have translation not only for Spain, but for most Spanish-speaking countries. And yeah, so the first edition was 25 years ago, as you said, and it took me about 5 years to write that book. And so I've been at this a long time. It took 10 years before that to get the model to where it could be even put into a book. So I'm old. I'll be turning 72 shortly, and I've been at this since the early 1980s, when I started learning from my clients about parts. I had no idea, but I was having trouble getting the kind of outcome in a study that I wanted with the eating disorders, and I'm trained as a family therapist. I have a PhD in that. And I was finding that family therapy wasn't doing the job. And so I began asking my clients why, and they started talking this language of parts. And they would say, there's a part of me that can be very critical of me inside when something bad happens. And then that brings up a part that can make me feel young and worthless and empty. And then in comes the binging part to take me away, to sort of rescue me from that young, empty, alone, worthless feeling. But the act of the binge brings the critic back. And then that empty feeling comes back, and so the binge has to come back. And this sounded familiar to me as a family therapist. Like there was this inner system of these parts that would interact in patterns that resembled the way families did. And so I got very curious, and I was lucky. I had a couple clients who were very articulate about their inner worlds and could teach it to me. And I began experimenting and had clients start to stand up for themselves to the critic, for example, or try to control the binge, and found that they were just getting worse, but I didn't know what else to do. So I'd say stand up stronger or fight with the binge more. And then I had a client who had a part that would cut her, and she insisted on showing me the open wounds every session. And I learned a technique for talking to parts called the open chair technique, and so I was having her be that part and sit in a chair and speak as it, and I would have my client then move and sit in another chair and talk to that cutting part, and I was talking to the cutting part, and we decided one session I wasn't going to let her leave until the part had agreed not to do it. And after badgering it for a couple hours, it said, "Okay, I won't." And I came and opened the door to the next session, and she had a big gash down the side of her face. And emotionally, I just collapsed inside, and I spontaneously said, "I can't beat you at this." And the part said, "I don't really want to beat you." And that was a turning point in the history of this work, because I shifted, no longer in that controlling part of me, but now just purely curious. Why do you do this to her? And the part talked about how when she was being sexually abused as a child, it needed to get her out of her body and contain the rage that would get her more abuse. And so hearing that, I shifted, and now I have a kind of appreciation for the heroic role it played in her life. And I convey that to the partner, broke into tears because everyone had tried to get rid of it, and talked more about why it still had to do this to her. But it really sounded like the part wasn't living in the present, like it was stuck in the past somewhere during those abuse scenes. And so with all of that, I began thinking, maybe these parts aren't what they seem. Maybe like kids in a family who are forced into roles that they don't like but feel are necessary to protect the family or because of the dynamics of the family. Maybe the same is true with this inner system. And that turns out to be the case. So almost 40 years later, I can safely say there aren't any bad parts. And that's the title of my book that will be coming out in a couple of weeks, No Bad Parts. And that's the challenge. That's a very big challenge to try to bring, not just to the psychotherapy community, but to the culture at large, because we all believe there are bad parts, and that they're just pure, negativity or pure evil sometimes. And so, yeah, it's a tough sell, but I'm happy to say that increasingly IFS has gained a lot of status in the last several years in particular. And then, in addition to these parts, it turns out there is an inner leader in all of us too that's separate from those parts, that gets released as you begin working with the parts. Because it turns out that as you start to identify the parts, they separate from you, whoever you are, and that person, when enough parts separate, has all these wonderful, what we call C-word qualities. Like is just purely curious, is confident, calm, has compassion, has a lot of courage, is clear, creativity, and feels connected or wants to connect. So those we call the 8 C's of what I'm going to call self-leadership, because as I was doing that and trying to have my clients get to know these parts, now that I knew they weren't what they seemed, and instead of fighting with them, I would ask for parts that hated the one we're trying to get to know to step out And this person would emerge with these C word qualities suddenly and spontaneously and would start to relate to the part in a healing way. And so when I would ask clients, what part of you is that? They'd say, that's not a part like these others. That's myself, or that's me. So I came to call that the self with a capital S. And again, 40 years later, thousands of clients later, thousands of therapists using this all over the world, we can safely say that that self is in everybody and is just beneath the surface of these parts and knows how to heal and can't be damaged. And that's a really big deal. That discovery uh, changes everything. So that's the model in a very small nutshell. And that's what the book is about. And not only to describe the model, but also step by step how to use it as a therapist. It's kind of a manual for therapists. So,
Thank you. I think it's very useful for us to convey the manual of IFS therapy because it's a skillful work to translate your concepts, your findings, and how it has been enriched over the years. And I believe you also mentioned how IFS is being applied now into other areas like families, um, couples, somatic illnesses, and now you also discuss the use with psychedelics, right?
yeah. Yeah, now all of those have been areas we've been involved with, and we're getting more and more involved with the psychedelic revolution, and also we're bringing it to the coaching world. Um, so it can have an impact on leaders of big companies or government leaders, and we have a lot of high-level coaches involved, and also ultimately want to bring it to the public. I'm also working on a book that'll be step by step for people to be able to do some of it on their own. So the ultimate goal is really to have an impact on the way people understand human nature, because this is a very different paradigm for understanding the way people operate. And the current paradigm has got us in a lot of trouble. And there's a need for a new paradigm.
Was sorry to interrupt. I was
Go ahead.
really love the chapter or the part. Well, I really like the book, but I love that chapter that you apply or you use IFS view for any cultural system or countries or oh, debería hablar en español. Perdón. Creo que disculpa que me gusta
Well, I'm going to
el
say this in
pasaje en el
Spanish.
capítulo y en la
I
tercera parte
like a
del
chapter
libro en
in
el
the
cual
book in
nos habla
which
que se extiende
Dr.
mucho esa
Schwartz
visión
talks about
desde la
this
IFS,
book,
la
this
visión
the
cultural, la visión
approach of
de
IFS to
personas
a vision of the
intergeneracional
world with a cognitive
pero
trauma
realmente
and
la
the
aplicación de la visión IFS en el
practice of
sistema
the
social
IFS
es
vision
muy
for
sanador,
social systems
toda la
that's
IFS
really
es muy
healing
gratificante
and
y
it's
constructiva
constructive
con
and it
mensajes,
really
¿no?
leads
Con
to
respuestas
outcomes and to
concretas.
responses that you can put in practice on a
Súper
daily life.
interesante
And
esa
this is
visión.
so interesting to me. I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit more on this.
Yeah, to do that, I'll give you a bit more of the map of the parts that I came up with. So as I was experimenting with clients, it became clear that I was making mistakes, and my clients were suffering because of them. So as a as a good systems person who wants to be ecologically sensitive, I began to try to get some clarity about what I was doing wrong, and was taught by my clients that they have parts that uh, often were hurt the most by the traumas they suffered, because they're these young, innocent inner children parts that before they're hurt give us all kinds of delightful qualities and creativity and awe at the world and playfulness and so on. But once they get hurt, now they carry what I'm going to call the burden of worthlessness or terror or emotional pain. And once they get burdened like that, we don't want to be around them, so we tend to lock them away inside. So I call those the exiles. And most all of us have a lot of exiles. And when you have a lot of exiles, other parts are forced from their naturally valuable states into roles that can be destructive to people and were necessary, like that cutting part I was talking about, during their traumas. But they get frozen in time back there, and they also feel like they have to contain all these exiles and protect them. So we call those protectors. So that's the big distinction between protectors and exiles. And then there's one class of protector we call managers, because they're trying to manage the world so your exiles don't get triggered, or you manage the body. And then other parts we call firefighters, because whenever an exile does get triggered and there's that raw emotion coming out, they have to get you away somehow. So like the binge and that eating disorder client. So that's the very simple map to the territory: protectors and exiles. And why I'm responding to your question that way is because you can overlay that map onto countries. Like in the United States, there's a huge now number of exiles of all kinds for all kinds of reasons, but one reason being the economic disparity in our country has never been greater. And so many, many, many people are working in jobs that they can't survive on. And then there's an elite who are very, very rich. And so when you have that kind of disparity and need to keep it that way, you have all these exiles, and any system at any level that has a lot of exiles is going to need a lot of very extreme protectors. And so in our country, we have people like Donald Trump who try to use the typical kind of both firefighter and manager approaches to containing the exiles and pretending they're not there. And and then because of that, you're going to need a lot of distractions, these firefighter distractions. And so people will have more and more symptoms, countries will have more and more symptoms, just like people will. And so anyway, that's the overlay that I think you're referring to, which now a lot of people that work at that level are getting interested in.
Thank you. What would be your word for people in the Spanish-speaking world who are looking at getting trained in IFS? What's I don't know. I'm called to ask you this. How do you feel? Yeah, what would be your word for people are inspired, but they something that you like to address to them during this recording?
Yeah, well, we very much want to train everybody who wants to be trained. We currently have the good problem that we can't service everybody. That we have way more people wanting to be trained than we have training programs. So we're trying to train new trainers and try to meet the demand as best we can. And we are working on setting up a training in Spanish. And in Spain, there are two of our lead trainers who are doing local trainings as far as I know. And I'm not sure how full those trainings are, but I think they are too.
Yes, yes.
So while people are waiting to get into a training, we have a program online called the Online Circle, which you don't get the same kind of supervision that you get in the trainings, but you get most of the content. But I don't believe that's in Spanish yet. But that would be one option. It's a year subscription program, and you get videos of me and some of my lead trainers, and then live Q&A and other kinds of materials. Um, there's a program I like a lot called Greater Than the Sum of the Parts, which is it's a audio book, I guess, on Sounds True, which has a lot of exercises for people that want to try it experientially. There's a lot of materials. Most of it's in English, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. So we will provide what we have in Spanish, and hopefully we'll get to publish some more of IFS books
I would love that.
and materials. So this has been very rich, a short interview with you, but we thank you for this. And I don't know, we also wanted to thank Marta Suisi, who couldn't be here with us. And could you speak something about her collaboration with you in this book?
Yeah, Martha is one of the most prolific writers on IFS now, and has done I'm not sure how many different books in collaboration with different people. In part because she loves to write and is a very good writer, and also helped a lot with the research for this book. I think you read, or maybe Marta read earlier, that it's 60% new material. The the publishers told us to say that, but it's really more. It's probably 70%. Because 25 years had gone by, and so we really wanted to do justice to how much the model had evolved over all that time. So,
Yeah,
and Martha really helped with a lot of that. So I'm very grateful to her, and it was wonderful to do this with her.
I think IFS is a great example of a model that has been inclusive. It has grown as a community. It has outreach to several layers of society, and not only enrich clinical practice, but the lives of so many people in such a healing way that's so profound.
Thank you for saying that. It does feel good now. It turns out that if you live long enough, that eventually your work gets appreciated. So
That is a big payoff in this rewarding in an inner sense, right?
that's right.
Apart from all the hard work
Yeah,
and the things that happen.
that's right.
Well, thank you, Dick, for being here with us for this book presentation. And I encourage our readers in Spain, in Latin America, to get hold of their copy. And we'll send an email with a discount voucher for them. So, okay, thank you so much.